In this episode of the Startup Project, I talked to Pankaj Jain, who wears many hats and is currently working as Chief Operating Officer of Workomo and also is an advisor for AngelList India's The Collective Fund. Pankaj has seen the evolution of Indian startup ecosystem both as a founder, as an investor, and both as an insider and an outsider. We had a wide-ranging conversation from various topics, including how Jio affected India's ecosystem to how Angel India thinks about angel investing itself. I had a blast talking to Pankaj. Hope you will too. Hey Pankaj, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nataraj. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. The first topic of our conversation I want to start with is this idea of community building, right? You started startup Saturday, you started startup weekend, and you have a head start. So you're sort of the OG community creator in an Indian ecosystem. What was that experience like?
It was incredible. So Startup Saturday um, came out of really a necessity. I had moved to India in 2007, and I had just begun my startup after moving. And I was having a ton of trouble hiring people, looking for a co-founder, you name it, the all of the usual problems that first-time founders typically deal with. And I had to build a network in India, which I didn't have. And 2007, there weren't a whole lot of startups or a whole lot of events or a community that you can tap into relatively easily. So I found a bar camp community. I got involved in organizing bar camps first. I think Barcamp Delhi 5 and Barcamp Delhi 6 were the first two that I had gotten involved with.
And then you started startup weekend.
And then I started Startup Saturday. So through Barcamp, I met a bunch of folks across Bombay and Bangalore that were looking to start something a little bit more formal. They had been doing a meetup in these cities called Startup Saturday, and they wanted to start something a little bit more formal. So I got involved with them and became a co-founder of Head Start Network, which was running Startup Saturday across, I think at that time it was 5 cities or 4 cities. And then we kind of expanded. I think today it's like across 20 cities or more in India. And so that was like 2008, 2009, 2010.
And why do you think like you were good at community building? Like, I mean, looking back, what made you good at community building?
I don't know if I was good at it or not, but I certainly had a passion for it. And so, it started with uh, a, a need that I had, which was to meet people, right? And those people could be potential co-founders. They could be potentially people that I might hire. That's really the two lenses that I was looking at it from.
So if I look at like community building right now, right, like everything right now is revolving around community, whether it's podcasts or influencer economy or passion economy. What do you see the difference between like creating a community online versus offline? Like, do you see any similarities or differences, or sort of what advice you would give to someone who's trying to build a community online now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think online communities are very difficult to do. I know people do them really, really well. They do them um, quickly and they scale them rapidly. For me, I found building online communities to be very difficult, partly because you don't have that um, face-to-face contact with people. And I think there's, unfortunately, 2020 has really forced all of us to go online and stay online. But there's a certain serendipity when things are offline and when things are in person, and you don't capture that in an online community. So it's easier to get more people into your community, assuming that you're marketing correctly and getting the right message out to folks. But I think it's hard to really build strong bonds within that community. If I look at the Startup Saturday Head Start community, or if I look at the Startup Weekend communities, both within India and internationally, the bonds that people have created are very, very strong. Partly because you were sitting face to face, you would see each other on a regular basis, and you were able to build deeper rooted relationships. I think breaking bread is important to build relationships, and unfortunately, that's something that we can't really do today. So I think, for me at least, I find building online communities difficult, partly because they are less personal. They require a very different type of attention, and it's easier to provide that attention, but it's also, I think there's a bit of a disconnect. And so you can have large online communities. I started the Indian Startup Club on Clubhouse a couple of months ago, and we just crossed 1,000 members right before New Year's. So, relatively quick in terms of building up the numbers there. But being able to really build relationships is a whole different problem, right? And I think that's one of the things that I see in online communities that's much, much harder to do is to build strong, deep relationships. Yeah.
I mean, one thing to me it struck as I think the pandemic sort of changed the idea of building online communities. I mean, people were not open to have or meet random people or on internet on different communities, and probably the reason why Clubhouse even exploded is because of the pandemic, in a sense that people were much more open to the idea of having conversations by meeting people through online events, because pre-pandemic for me, if you want to talk to like-minded individuals, I used to mostly find people here in startup communities in Seattle. But right now, even in the US, whether it's lunch club or different sort of tools are emerging where I think there is an avenue to sort of build even deeper conversation. I mean, we met on Clubhouse, right? So
Yep.
uh, it, I think it's that one of things that sort of the positive outcomes of the pandemic is that people have changed their opinion of can relationships be built online, and I'm sort of hopeful that more and more of this will happen.
Yeah.
uh, but one of the interesting things is you've I mean sort of closed your company, and you've talked about your difficulty in working with Indian startup ecosystem, and for example you've talked about how difficult it was to actually getting police verification in India. But you actually mentioned one interesting thing which I want to sort of explore, is you said you learned a lot about yourself
Yeah.
with that experience, but you never actually talked about what you actually learned about it. So I want to sort of go into the direction of what did you learn about yourself in that process that you didn't know before?
So a lot of it was just a lot of intuitive guessing, right? Like I think over time, part of it was because of the professional direction that I took. A lot of what drove me was data and analyzing things and making decisions based off of that. And in India, I started relearning that relying on my intuition and my gut was probably more important than the data. You had to bring the two together, but that was one of the things that I realized is like, don't rely only on data, uh, really rely on your gut. And there are exceptions, of course, but um, kind of finding that medium is really important, right? So that was one of the things that I learned about myself is don't be focused only on the data and the analytics behind making a decision or hiring somebody or whatever, but also rely on your intuition a lot more. I also learned that I was far more capable of adapting than I previously thought I was. Moving across the world, I had never lived in India before that. So moving to essentially what was a new country that I had spent a lot of time visiting and had many relatives in, but I really didn't understand, popular Indian culture. I didn't really understand, like I don't, I think in the last 30 years, I might have seen maybe two or three Bollywood movies. I've never watched Indian television. Even when I lived there, I never had television there. Um, so, without connecting to popular culture, it's hard to really connect with people. So I started having some difficulty with that when I first landed, and then I started realizing that here are certain things that I need to change about myself, and certain things that I need to do in order to uh, really kind of integrate in and make friends and meet people. And so it may seem like something that's natural for a lot of people, but um, it, it can be very difficult also. So I realized that these are things that I need to do. So I adapted. Um, I also realized that I was pretty bad at hiring people. Prior to moving to India, I had hired a lot of people across a lot of different locations. I never had to fire anybody in my life. And when I moved to India, it was the complete opposite. There was one person, he was actually the first person I hired, who stayed with me throughout the whole journey. But other than him, it was a revolving door. Like, it was really tough. I had to really reassess, like, what are the parameters and what's the criteria that I'm uh, hiring people according to, and reevaluate that and rethink a lot of those things. So kind of ties into some of the other things that I had learned about myself while I was there. Um, I also realized for the first time in my life that I'm more American than I am Indian. Prior to moving to India, I always thought of myself as being Indian first and American second. And after moving to India, it's ironic. That's when I realized that, the way I think, the things that I value, I'm more American than I am Indian. And, I developed a much deeper appreciation for both sides of myself, the Indian side and the American side. Um, and I think that was coming to that realization is what allowed me to do a lot of the other things that I started doing after I wound up shutting down my startup, because I realized there's certain strengths and certain weaknesses that both sides have, so why not use them as much as I can to bring a certain way of thinking to other people. And I think with the startup community, just in general, the way startups operate, uh, is it's more about getting things done, and people are a little bit more open-minded. So I think that kind of really fit well with what was needed amongst the startup ecosystem in India at that time. So that to me was like an interesting learning that I had. And there, there's many others, and we could probably like sit here for another hour and talk about a lot of the other ones. But to me, more than what I learned. It was a time for me to learn how to introspect, right? Like every day as a founder, failing was becoming the norm. And prior to that, uh, I'd been lucky. I never really had any failures. Well, not LTCM was a big failure, but not for me. For me, it was a great learning experience very early in my career. But it was the first time that on a daily basis I had to really struggle to find any sort of wins as an entrepreneur in India, and that forced me to learn how to introspect and to look inwards and see, what am I thinking, what am I doing, who am I, and what should I change about myself. Um, so that was probably the most important thing that I learned about myself, was like, how do I look into myself and really objectively criticize myself and change what needs to be changed.